viewers, welcome to my YouTube channel. Get ready for heart-touching stories. Don't forget to subscribe and let's begin.
My father never walked into a room. He presided over it, even at the breakfast table in his flannel robe and reading glasses. There was something courtroom about him. The deliberate way he set down his coffee cup, the measured silence before he spoke, the sense that whatever verdict he was about to deliver had already been handed down somewhere in the cold chamber of his mind, and this moment was merely the sentencing. Judge Harold Raymond Calloway, 31 years on the circuit bench. 4 commendations, 0 softness as far as I could tell. I was his only child, which meant I was also his only defendant. The falling out happened on a Tuesday in March, which felt appropriate. Nothing good has ever been decided on a Tuesday in March. I was 32 years old, not a teenager, not some confused kid making impulse choices. I was a 32-year-old woman who had spent a decade building a small but honest life as a ceramic artist in the city, and I had just told my father that I was leaving my fiancé, David, whom my father adored, David, who was an attorney, David, who had once cited case law at Thanksgiving dinner, and my father had looked at him the way some men look at sunsets. I won't bore you with the details of what David had done, or rather what David had been doing for approximately 14 months with a paralegal named Brooke who worked in his firm's downtown office. I will only say that I found out and that I ended it, and that when I called my father to tell him, not for his blessing, not for his advice, just to tell him, what I got instead was a trial. "You may have been too difficult to live with," he said, his exact words. I stood in my apartment holding the phone, surrounded by half-finished bowls and the smell of dried clay, and I felt something calcify in my chest. "I didn't ask for your opinion," I said. "I'm offering perspective. You're taking his side." "I'm not taking sides, Nora. I'm looking at the evidence." Evidence, as though my life were a case file, as though my heartbreak had exhibits. We didn't speak after that. 3 months passed, quiet as a held breath. The cat showed up in late June, skulking around the dumpsters behind my building with the wary, battle-scarred look of someone who had survived things they weren't willing to discuss. He was gray, not a romantic silver gray, but the gray of old concrete, of overcast skis, of bureaucratic carpeting. One of his ears had a notch in it. His eyes were amber and deeply skeptical. I left out a tin of sardines. He ate them without making eye contact. I left out more sardines. Same result. After 3 weeks of this transactional arrangement, he followed me inside one evening and sat in the center of my living room floor, surveying the apartment with the unhurried authority of someone assessing whether the space met his standards. He stayed. I named him Judge. I want to be clear, it was not subtle. It was not accidental. I knew exactly what I was doing when I filled out the little card at the vet's office. Name of pet, Judge. Owner, Nora Calloway. And I felt a small, childish satisfaction about it that I'm not entirely proud of, but also do not regret. There is something deeply human about the need to make our pain into a private joke, to take the thing that wounded us and give it a ridiculous little life in our living room, where it sits on our throw pillows and knocks our cups off the counter. Judge was, by any metric, an objectively difficult animal. He had opinions about everything and the willingness to enforce them. He knocked my ceramics off the shelves not accidentally, but with considered deliberation, one paw extended, a pause, a look at me, then the push. He yowled at 4 a.m. not because he was hungry, but because he had something to say. He sat on my sketchbooks. He ignored me when I was lonely and attached himself to my ankles when I was trying to work. He was, in other words, magnificent. I talked to him the way I used to talk to my father, except Judge, to his credit, never told me I might be the problem. He listened with his amber eyes half closed, occasionally slow blinking, and I took that as agreement. He said I was difficult, I told Judge one evening. Judge was sitting on the windowsill watching the street below with the detached interest of a man reading a newspaper. His own daughter, can you imagine? Judge turned and looked at me. Then he walked over and sat directly on my lap, which he had never done before and which he would not do again for several weeks. I burst into tears. He endured it. My father called in September. I almost didn't answer. I sat watching his name on the screen, Dad, Judge Harold Calloway, because I had his full title in my phone, partly for formality and partly, honestly, for the irony, and I thought about what it would mean to let it ring. To let the silence continue, clean and uncomplicated, I answered. "Owe you an apology," he said. "I was so unprepared for this that I didn't speak. What I said in March was unkind and incorrect." A pause. "Your mother told me so." My mother had been gone for 6 years. I had no idea in what form her corrections still reached him, dreams perhaps, or that particular silence that descends on a house when someone is conspicuously not there. But I believed it. My mother had always known how to get through. "Okay," I said, "I'd like to see you." So he came to the apartment. A Sunday in early October, the kind of day that smells like apples and the end of things. I cleaned, which felt like a defeat, but I cleaned anyway. I put on coffee. I thought about warning him. I did not warn him. He arrived in his good coat, carrying a paper bag of apricot pastries from the bakery near his house. A gesture so familiar it cracked something open in me before he'd even crossed the threshold. I hugged him in the doorway. He patted my back twice, then 3 times, which was, from Harold Calloway, the approximate emotional equivalent of weeping. We sat. He asked about my work. I showed him the new pieces, a series of irregular bowls with cracked glazed surfaces that I'd been calling fault lines, though I didn't mention that. He held one carefully in both hands the way he used to hold evidence and said, "These are serious work, Nora." Coming from him, serious was the highest available praise. Then Judge walked in. My father looked at the cat. The cat looked at my father, that long, amber, withholding stare. "You have a cat," my father said. "I do." "When did this happen?" "June." He reached out a hand. Judge sniffed it, found it satisfactory, and with extraordinary timing that I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for, walked in a slow circle and lay down directly on my father's shoes. My father looked down at the cat on his shoes. Then he looked at me. "What's his name?" he asked, and here it was, the moment. I had imagined it many times in the abstract, my father asking me, saying it, the recognition crossing his face. I had imagined it as triumphant, a little wicked, a perfect, quiet score. Instead, I looked at my father, who was older than I'd been allowing myself to notice, whose hands had more spots, whose hair had completed its journey to white, and I felt the joke dissolve into something else, something more honest. "Judge," I said. He was still for a moment. Then Harold Raymond Calloway, 31 years on the circuit bench, 4 commendations, a man who had maintained composure through testimony that had made younger lawyers leave the room, laughed, not a polite laugh, a real one. It came out of him like it had been stored under pressure, like it surprised him, and it transformed his face briefly into the face of someone younger, someone I half remembered from before the robes and the reputation had settled so completely over him. "Is that right?" he said when he recovered. "It is." He looked down at Judge, who had not moved from his shoes. "Well," he said. He reached down and with his large, deliberate hands scratched the cat behind his notched ear. Judge pressed into it. "Traitor, I suppose I deserve that." "You suppose?" I said. "I do." He looked up at me. "I was wrong, Nora, about David, about what I said. I looked at the wrong evidence." He paused. "I am better at that in a courtroom than I am at home. I always have been." It was not a perfect apology. He was not built for perfect apologies. The architecture of him didn't allow for it. But it was real, and real was what I'd wanted my whole life more than perfect. "Okay," I said again. And this time it meant more. Judge stood, stretched with aristocratic slowness, and relocated to the armchair. My father and I drank coffee and ate the apricot pastries and talked for 3 hours, about my mother, about his cases, about the fault lines in things and whether they made them weaker or more interesting. Mostly more interesting, we agreed. Before he left, he stopped at the door and looked back at the cat, now asleep in the armchair with his notched ear flat and his skeptical face gone soft. "He has a look about him," my father said. "He does. Authoritative. Much so." My father smiled fully, without reservation. "Good name, then," he said, and walked out into the October afternoon. I stood in the doorway and watched him go. Behind me, Judge made a small sound, half yawn, half pronouncement, as if to say, "Case closed. We can all go home now." I went back inside. I sat down beside my cat, who was named after my father, in the apartment where I had survived the year and made serious work, and learned that sometimes the joke you make to protect yourself becomes the bridge that saves you. Outside, the leaves came down gold and unhurried. Court adjourned.